Hey everyone. So, welcome to Chapter 4 lecture. And Chapter 4 is where things start to get interesting as far as I'm concerned, even more so than the things that we've learned in the foundational part of the class. Because now we start talking about the rights, our rights as citizens of this country, the rights that are guaranteed and protected by the Constitution. And Chapter 4, the idea of civil liberties. So, I want you to think for a moment. What do you think we mean by civil liberties? Uh, I would hazard to guess that most people don't even know what civil liberties are. They don't know what they are, how they apply to them, or what to do about them, or anything of the like. But it's probably one of the most essential uh, aspects of our political system that holds our democracy, if we are in fact a democracy, together, is the idea of our civil liberties. And our civil liberties are basically contained within the Bill of Rights. And the Bill of Rights are comprised of the first 10 amendments of the U.S. Constitution. So, for example, like things like freedom of speech, for example, right? Freedom to peacefully assemble, things like that, right to bear arms are part of your civil liberties. Now, I will tell you, some of these are very obviously problematic because they are subject to interpretation. And interpretation can be very, very difficult when we talk about the idea of civil liberties. So let's jump into this a little bit, see what we're actually looking at here. So the idea of civil liberties is based on those 10 amendments are to your rights that protect you from the government. Now, that might seem a little strange because many people say, well, why do I need to be protected from my government? Like, we elect these people to represent us and to help make our lives better. Why would I have to be protected from them? And a lot of it in the early founding of our country had a lot to do with the founding fathers. And they realized, again, that the people had no taste for having a monarch or somebody come in that was going to basically potentially become a ruler, and that the system that they were trying to create was going to fall apart. So they gave the people a certain amount of rights that said, hey, this is your system, this is your democracy, and these are the things that you can utilize to protect you, that are your constitutional rights to protect you from anything the government tries to do. So in case you did have a king or somebody try to usurp power, that the people had rights that were protected by the Constitution. Now, those rights, there were two types of rights that were basically the founding part of the founding of this ideology of civil liberties. And the first one was called natural rights. This came out through a famous writings by John Locke, and where he says famously that basically all human beings are allowed life, liberty, and property. And that becomes really important because those are what they call your natural rights. Everybody have your God-given rights, if you would. And then there are the other type of rights are called positive rights, and these are rights that are granted or guaranteed by the Constitution and protected by your government. Even though they would protect you from the government actually instituted these so that to say that, hey, there is a check and balance. Even though I would argue probably problematically that we rarely use this is in fact the founding of our country. Now, when you go back and look at the Bill of Rights, its origins start with the Declaration of Independence. This is really important to note because in that Declaration of Independence really was the outline of where the citizens of the colonies laid out to King George what their rights were or should be, which is what led to, of course, to the Revolutionary War. And so the Constitution was passed basically because of the Bill of Rights, because it really required that, along with the issue of slavery, to be the justification for passage of the U.S. Constitution. Now, early on, the Bill of Rights had very little influence because the country just really, most people weren't educated. Most people had no idea about the Bill of Rights or even the impact of the Constitution and what that all really means. So in this, it had, until people started really becoming more politically socialized, more intellectually aware, more educated, and really having a better understanding of the laws. And certainly the elites already knew this, but the common people really didn't have any understanding of this stuff. So this is really like the beginning of them developing and understanding their rights, their legal rights. And so by the 20th century, you start to see more and more of the sort of understanding of the interpretation of laws and how they actually work and are manifested. Okay. So let's delve a little deeper into this idea of civil liberties. And so as you can see here, one of the things that usually, I've talked about in the past about, we never know how free we really are until we get pushed the limits, until you get to the, if you have a big corral, for those of you who are in my class know that I drew this big picture of the United States on the board, and then I put a bunch of little dots representing people in the country. And I said, when you have a country big as ours, people graze around on the inside and feel pretty free because they have no sense of, where the fence begins or ends. And frequently it's the case that we find that the only time you find out the only way we can see if our civil liberties, for example, stand up to scrutiny and really define us is by court cases. So when there's something that challenges one of those 10 amendments, those first 10 amendments, your Bill of Rights, usually it's a court case that either shows that it's worth what is written, or that it's not. And so this particular chart shows you some of the famous court cases that came up that basically validated your Bill of Rights. So back in 1925, for example, Getlow versus New York, freedom of speech. Freedom of the press was 1931, Neer versus Minnesota. Right to freedom of assembly, that was Delaware versus Van Arsdale. Freedom to exercise religion, Cantwell versus Connecticut. So there's all these different times when there are challenges, or the government may overreach or overstep that may end up being a court case that has to be dealt with. And that's usually where we see again how strong your Bill of Rights and your freedoms really are. Okay, so now one of the examples is the freedom of religion, right? Because this is religion has a very special place in the United States, and so most of the practiced Christian religions or variations thereof have their beliefs take precedence over law, or over state and local laws. So, for example, if the Seventh-day Adventists, they don't work on Saturdays, I believe it is. So therefore, if you were a boss to try to make someone who's Seventh-day Adventist work on a Saturday and you tried to fire them, then they could go to court and probably get their job back. Same with the Amish, 8th grade, they stop school if they want to. And so therefore, if you tried to force them to go to high school, that wouldn't work out either because their religion allows them to have the leeway to do so. Same with the Mormons and polygamy laws. If they want to have multiple wives, that's not a common practice anymore. Plus, I think it's probably pretty expensive if you have more than one. But anyhow, these are some of the things that were put in place to protect the rights of people. The Establishment Clause simply means that what we look for is history. In most of these situations, we look at how has it been done throughout history. And if it's been something that's gone on for decades and has been practiced that way, then that's what's called the Establishment Clause. And that's usually, if you were going to go to court, that's sometimes what allows for you to be able to win your case in that situation, because if the practice has been going on or ongoing throughout a period of time, you therefore don't have to worry about, or that should say your attorney would have good grounds to be able to justify their argument to support your case. So another example is the First Amendment of justice, which is really one of the keys of democracy is the freedom of speech. So when we say freedom of speech, we mean being able to say what you want to say without fear of retaliation or having losing your job or saying certain things. But I will tell you, there are instances where you don't have freedom of speech, or if you try to use it, it may blow up in your face. So one of the things that's really important to understand about these first 10 amendments or your Bill of Rights is that they really are, they are subject to question. And I think you have to be very careful how you utilize them. So remember, when I say subject to interpretation, I simply mean that if you think of the interpretation of the law a certain way and the government sees it another way, you may find that the government has more power than you have, and so their interpretation matters more than your interpretation. So be very careful about that, to recognize that while on one hand we have these 10 amendments that define our rights, but again, if the authorities or other folks in government and power see it a different way, and you're an individual and they've got government and money, it becomes very difficult to push your position. But it certainly is on the positive side. It is by sharing our ideas, by having free speech, we can share what we want to say. Even if, unfortunately, when people say crazy stuff, we allow crazy people to say crazy stuff as well. You just have to be smart enough or aware enough to know when people are crazy and not follow down the whole of listening to crazy people do crazy things or say crazy things, and then follow them as because of that. So it's also the space of where we are self-governing people. This is where we have, and I would say the public and the people have generally kind of failed in some ways, because the people in Congress who represent us, we trust them to do the right thing, but we very rarely keep an eye on what they're doing. And, when we think about why do we have those people sitting in Congress? And the bottom line is we have them there for one particular reason. And that is to help make our lives better, to provide opportunities for us to excel and grow and have an opportunity to do well in our lives. And that's the primary reason they're there. If you're not doing well and and you find that the laws and policies that are being created are not helping you, if you're poor in the middle class these days, then that's a reflection of us, because we're the ones that elect them or don't elect them, either by choice of not voting or by voting foolishly sometimes and not really knowing who the candidates are that are running for office or that are really representing us. But it is also a sense of self-fulfillment that goes with this, and it's also considered a safety valve, because they feel like as long as you have the ability to share and even no matter good or bad, you'd be able to say what you want to say, that takes the pressure off, people who can't speak up for themselves. So there are positives to the idea of freedom of speech. You'll see in the videos I'm sure you saw the one, "This is what democracy looks like," in the earlier chapter, and you got a chance to see just how limiting your freedom of speech can be, even when sometimes they take it away from you, and the question of whether they should be able to take it away from you in times of crisis. And that's a very complicated question, is whether or not you should have to give them up. Many people believe that you should never, ever, ever give up your civil liberties, no matter what, even during times of crises. And many times they say, because if you ever give them up, you may never see them again, because the government has the habit of taking those things and never giving them back. So that's an important aspect. Also, freedom of the press is another example. Press being able to write and be able to inform the citizens of what they need to be able to provide, but without fear of being sued or without restraint. There's also symbolic freedom of expression, and that has to do with like flag burning. I asked a question in class, yesterday regarding this, and I said, "Do you think you should be able to burn the flag?" And it's very controversial to burn the U.S. flag, but you have a legal right to do so. It's your freedom of expression, and it took the United States versus O'Brien in 1968, a gentleman who was protesting the Vietnam War, to have that, that right, that freedom of expression of burning the flag, to be upheld. Along with hate speech. Ironically, the thing about hate speech is so interesting is that we don't do a very good job of protecting the rights of individuals who suffer from hate speech. People can say things and incite violence, and then the next thing you know, people can be hurt or killed, and but the liability is very limited in terms of, well, because somebody responded to the rhetoric of hate and decided to take action. There's also been more push toward regulating the internet, especially with cyberbullying. That most schools, for example, have cyberbullying commentary. Like even in my syllabus, it talks about having etiquette and not bullying any of your classmates, even if you disagree with their opinions. The right to bear arms. This is a pretty controversial topic, and it's one that I spend a lot of time normally in class on. I wish we were in class because I have some very gut-wrenching video to talk about these things and the right to bear arms and people who've lost their lives as a result of this. And a lot of times people will read that Second Amendment, or all they do is read the heading, right to bear arms, and they think, it means I can just have a gun whenever I want. That wasn't the reason why they wrote it, and I think people have misinterpreted it to serve their interest, and it's unfortunate because a lot of people in this country have lost their lives as a result of it. So, okay. These are just some more examples of different amendments in those first 10 rather. And then, for example, a lot of this has to do with your rights if you're criminally accused. Almost half of the Bill of Rights is protection from criminal. If you have been arrested or stopped or detained for a crime. So these are the types of things that were put in place to protect you in case of those situations. Now, in terms of they polled the American people, and they asked them, which rights do you think should be guaranteed in the Constitution? This is a chart that shows you some of the things that they felt like should have been rights that were guaranteed. The first one being right to equality regardless of gender, right to equality in general, right to privacy, right not to be enslaved, right to own property, right to education, right to equality regardless of sexual orientation. So you see here there's a long list of those things that are put in place that people have suggested but have yet to come to fruition. They're implied but not necessarily in practice. Again, more rights regarding the criminally accused, things like getting the Eighth Amendment, of course, provides bail, things like that. Right to privacy, of course, the issue, unfortunately, abortion is off the table necessarily in some states, but not in all states. They put it back into the hands of the states, but as you can see, abortion rights, Roe versus Wade, but there's also other cases that were put in place regarding the issue of abortion and the right to privacy during those situations. Okay. I think that was the last slide, and I'm going to stop there, and I will see you in Chapter 5. Thanks a lot, you guys.